Today, we're diving into the history of Angola, a nation that was really forged in the fire of conflict and colonialism for, get this, 500 years. It's an incredible story of survival, of resistance, and ultimately of resilience. And that, right there, is the big question we're tackling. How does a place, a people, endure something like that? We're talking about a story that stretches from powerful ancient kingdoms through the absolute horrors of the slave trade, a brutal fight for independence, and then an even more devastating civil war. Understanding how Angola survived all of that is the only way to really understand the nation today. All right, so to get a real grip on modern Angola, we have to rewind. Way, way back. Long before the first European ships ever appeared on the horizon. This land was bustling with sophisticated and powerful societies that laid the groundwork for everything that came after. What's so amazing about this timeline is just the sheer depth of history we're looking at. We're not talking a few centuries, we're talking tens of thousands of years of people living here. Then comes this huge game changer, the Bantu migrations, bringing in farming and ironworking. That technology eventually paved the way for these major regional powers, the Congo and Dongo kingdoms, to rise up. So you can see here, you basically had two major groups that really shaped early Angolan society. On one side, you had the Khoisan, who had this incredibly deep, sustainable connection to the land. And then on the other, you had the Bantu peoples, who brought a full-on technological revolution with them. Iron tools, settled farming, and that shift is what allowed for bigger populations and eventually the kind of complex, centralized states that would come to dominate the region.
Yeah, so forget any image of simple, isolated communities. The Congo and Ndongo kingdoms were the real deal. We're talking highly advanced societies with complex political structures, powerful monarchs, and huge trade networks that connected them all across the continent long before Europeans showed up. But then, in the late 15th century, everything changed. The arrival of Portuguese explorers marked this dramatic and honestly devastating turning point. It kicked off a brand new era of foreign domination and exploitation that would last for centuries. And here's the crucial thing. That first contact, which started out as just trade, for things like ivory and copper, it quickly spiraled into the horrifying business of human trafficking. The massive demand for labor in places like Brazil turned Angola into an epicenter of the Atlantic slave trade. It was a tragedy that would scar its societies for hundreds of years. Just let that number sink in for a minute. Over 4 million people. It's a scale of human loss that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. This wasn't just a number. It was the ripping apart of families, of entire communities, the shredding of the very social fabric of these kingdoms. But even in the face of all that horror, there was incredible resistance. And Queen Zinga of the Ndongo Kingdom, wow, she is just this towering figure in Angolan history. She was a brilliant diplomat, a genius military strategist, and she spent decades fighting the Portuguese. She just refused to let her kingdom be swallowed by the colonial machine. She is the embodiment of that resilient spirit. And that spirit of resistance, the kind you see in people like Queen Zinga, it never died out. By the 20th century, after centuries of exploitation and forced labor, it just exploded into this organized, armed struggle for liberation. You can see on this timeline how things just escalated so fast. What started as political movements in the 50s turned into a full-blown war by 1961. But the real turning point, the thing that changed everything, didn't happen on a battlefield in Angola. No, it happened in the streets of Lisbon. The Carnation Revolution in 1974 brought down the dictatorship in Portugal, and with it, the whole colonial empire. Okay, now this slide is absolutely crucial to understanding what happens next. You see, the fight for independence wasn't one unified movement. You had three major rival groups, each with different ideologies, and, this is the key part, different international backers. The Cold War was basically being fought by proxy in Angola, and that was about to have some tragic consequences. So, just like that, the colonial power was gone, and that left this massive power vacuum. The fight against the common enemy was over. And so, these three liberation movements, armed to the teeth and backed by global superpowers, they turned their attention to a new fight, the fight for control of Angola itself. And this is where the story takes such a tragic turn. The moment of liberation, the very thing they had all been fighting for, it wasn't the beginning of peace. It was the start of an even longer, even more destructive conflict. a civil war that would last for 27 years. So on Independence Day, the MPLA, which held the capital city, declared itself the new government. The other two groups, UNITA and the FNLA, immediately refused to accept it. The dream of a united, free Angola just shattered, almost overnight.
So you have to ask, right? Why? Why did it all fall apart so fast? Well, the answer is in that toxic mix of old internal rivalries being supercharged by massive foreign intervention. Angola basically became a chessboard for the Cold War. And this slide really breaks it down. You had the MPLA government, backed by the Soviet Union and Cuba, fighting a huge UNITA insurgency in the countryside, which was being armed and funded by the United States and apartheid South Africa. This conflict was no longer just about Angola, it was a global proxy war. After decades of failed peace deals and just immense suffering, the war finally ended. But it didn't end at a negotiating table. It ended on the battlefield. The death of UNITA's charismatic and really stubborn leader, Jonas Savimbi, removed the main driving force of the rebellion. And within weeks, a ceasefire was signed. The war was over. So, with the war finally finished, Angola faced this monumental task of rebuilding a country that was completely shattered by nearly 30 years of nonstop conflict. The challenge now was to turn that hard-won peace into actual prosperity for its people. But rebuilding came with a totally new kind of problem, something economists call the resource curse. It's the strange paradox where having tons of natural wealth, like oil, can actually end up hurting your country's development. All that easy oil money can fuel corruption and stop investment in other important things like farming or manufacturing. And this chart just lays the problem out there in stark terms. In the years right after the war, oil made up a staggering 90% of the country's exports. That makes the entire economy incredibly vulnerable. If the price of oil drops, the whole country suffers. It's a really dangerous position to be in. So the path forward is pretty clear, but it's also incredibly difficult. Angola has to break its addiction to oil, it has to tackle deep-rooted corruption, it has to physically rebuild the entire country's infrastructure, and maybe hardest of all, it has to heal the social wounds left by decades of war. Today, Angola is a major player in African politics, no doubt about it. But back home, it's still wrestling with the ghosts of its past. High unemployment, especially for young people, trying to strengthen its young democracy, and navigating a really complex world with powers like China and the US. These are the big challenges of right now. And this brings us right back to where we started. Time and time again, Angola has shown this unbelievable capacity for resilience. The ultimate question now is whether it can finally turn that resilience and its immense natural wealth into a stable, prosperous future that's shared by all its people. That is the challenge, and that is the hope for 21st century Angola.